Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you out there joining us for this webinar uh, on the topic of the Middle Corridor, linking Asia and Europe, promise and challenges. This is the sixth of a monthly series of webinars that we started this year, 2024, at the Center for the National Interest as part of the Central Asia Connectivity Project launched earlier this year. Or if you want to access our earlier webinars, please go to the Central Asia Connectivity Project section of the center's website. So the Middle Corridor, also known as the Trans-Caspian International Trade Route, is an emerging transcontinental multimodal network of transit routes. It offers an alternative to both the Northern Corridor through Russian territory and to the sea-based routes that dominate Asia-Europe trade. In particular, the Middle Corridor links China to the Central Asian states, passing through the Caspian Sea to the South Caucasus states and continuing to Europe, including Turkey, of course. Amid severe economic sanctions on Russia due to the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, as well as disruptions to the Suez Canal caused by Houthi attacks on Red Sea shipping, the Middle Corridor has over the past couple of years garnered increased attention and pledges of funding for its development. So the questions today are, what is the Middle Corridor's potential? What steps need to be taken to ensure it is fully realized? And we have a terrific group of panelists to help illuminate these questions and others about the Middle Corridor. I'm going to introduce our three panelists first, and then we'll launch into our discussion. For those in our audience, if you would like to pose a brief question, please do so through the chat function at the bottom of the screen on your Zoom app. So leading off will be Dr. Marcia McGraw-Olive, who is a scholar and retired World Bank official who managed strategy and operations in Eastern Europe and Eurasia for nearly 3 decades. Dr. Olive is on the faculty of Johns Hopkins SAIS, an advisory board member of the Caspian Policy Center and Eurasia Foundation, and global fellow at the Wilson Center. In 2022, she received a George F. Kennan Fellowship to research U.S. strategy in Central Asia. In March she moderated the first B5+1 forum in Almaty, a public-private dialogue between U.S. and Central Asian states. Our second speaker is coming to us from Baku, Azerbaijan. Damyan Krenyevich Mishkovich is professor of practice at the Azerbaijani Diplomatic Academy University in Baku, where he also serves as Director for Policy Research, Analysis, and Publications at its Institute for Development and Diplomacy. He is a former senior advisor to the President of the UN General Assembly, the President of Serbia, and the Foreign Minister of Serbia. At the turn of the century, he served as managing editor, that's quite a while ago, of the National Interest, where he was also a fellow of European Affairs at CFTNI. So this is a case of the prodigal son coming home, so to speak. Our third panelist is Stephen Benson, president of Littoral Solutions. He recently assumed the role as president of Laser Light Federal LLC, a subsidiary of the global telecom company Laser Light Communications. Steve is a retired naval officer, a logistician. For over 25 years, he conducted naval operations around the globe and crafted and implemented international security strategy and policy. He oversaw the assessments of the U.S. Navy Expeditionary Warfare portfolio of systems and platforms worth over $100 billion. He was a U.S. Navy Fellow at CSIS and spent a decade supporting the Russia and Eurasia program initiatives, most of it when I was director there of that program from 2007 to 2015. He was an integral member of project teams on the Northern Distribution Network and the Modern Silk Road at CSIS that I directed. Steve introduced me to the world of logistics. And I always remember one of the first things he told me, Andy, strategy is for amateurs, logistics is for professionals. And with that, let me turn it over to our professionals today. Each speaker will make some brief opening remarks, after which I'll moderate a discussion until 11 a.m. sharp Eastern Standard Time. Marcia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I appreciate this invitation and look forward to our conversation. Since I'm kicking it off, let me start with my three main messages. First, improving the Trans-Caspian international transport route. That's a mouthful, so I prefer to say the middle corridor is a high-stakes priority to reduce long-term dependence for markets and trade routes on Russia and China. Just as in the 1990s, happiness was multiple pipelines, so too today are multiple corridors. Secondly, speed is critical. Improvements will take time, at least a decade. We need to act now while demand and determination are strong by regional actors and while Russia is distracted by the Ukraine war. At some point, Russia will want to disrupt the middle corridor. And third, it is in the United States' interest. It's in our national interest. Aside from direct benefits through trade and investment, we do not want the strategic wealth of Central Asia to be dominated by and for China. So message one. First, let's be clear what's at stake. We wouldn't even be talking about the middle corridor, which has been around since the Silk Road days, if it weren't for the Ukraine war. But that route through Belarus and Russia, which became toxic to traders right after the war started, is still going to be there when the war is over. And it's because it's a direct trail line with very predictable time and cost of travel that, by the way, also relies on Chinese subsidies. But by contrast, as you heard Andy say, the middle corridor, which goes across the Caspian, is multimodal. And that means it's a logistics, you need professionals for this one, let me tell you, because there are rail, ships, trucks that cross land in as much as 7 to 10 national borders, depending on the destination. Costs are much higher and very unpredictable. Travel time is as well, even though the distance is less than half of the northern route. And after the invasion, the route was just totally unable to handle the surge in traffic, not because of capacity constraints, but due to transshipment, coordination delays, and crossing borders. So this gets back to those professional logistics issues. So what can realistically be done to make this middle corridor more competitive? Well, the World Bank believes that if we have appropriate policy and investments in infrastructure, you can triple the freight volume and cut shipping time by half by 2030. So that sounds good, but that assumes a big increase in China trade with Europe, which, by the way, collapsed in 2023 by quite a lot. And now Russia-China trade is overtaken Europe to China trade. Now, in contrast, the middle corridor increased its tonnage by 77%. And there's a gap between how much is handled by the northern corridor and how much by the middle corridor, but that narrowed considerably in 2023 from 6 to 18%. That still leaves a big multiple, right? That still means the northern corridor is going to be always larger and handling more. So if the middle corridor can't ever replace the northern corridor, why bother? Well, for a very good reason. It is a critical diversification tool and means to develop a dynamic regional economy within Central Asia and the Caucasus over to Turkey and then the Black Sea. This is the World Bank's logic and why they're backing it, and they are spot on. Not only will trade volumes increase, but countries in the region, particularly Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, will be able to transport more goods of higher value to new markets, global markets. Foreign investors, including 200 American companies that are now in Uzbekistan, will participate in this move with higher value exports in chemicals, fertilizer, metals, and foodstuffs. Now, this is for trade within Central Asia and across the Caucasus, but we can envision this moving up to Ukraine. This is kind of looking at this as an arc of activity is critical. And by becoming economically stronger, the region will lessen reliance on Russia and China, both for trade and transit. That's my message number one. Now, why is speed critical? Now, the regional actors all get it. In 2022, Turkey had already led, along with Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Kazakhstan, a roadmap with all the investments that would be needed. Not last year, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, and Georgia have formed a single logistics operator, and all the major development banks have signed on with starting to provide technical assistance and whatnot. And now that's important, I think, because there's also momentum building for another route that's also been popular or desired for a long time. That's the north-south transport corridor, which goes through Iran to the port of Chabahar. Now there's another one at the port of Gwadar, China-Pakistan corridor, but to just focus on the one through Iran, India recently invested in that big port, and Afghanistan is getting interested in that route. It does have problems too. It will need investments just as the middle corridor will, but Russia is probably going to want to do it, finance it because it's beneficial to Russia. Now, obviously, the United States would rather see an east-west corridor option that does not go through sanctioned Iran or that benefits the Taliban. So third, going to precisely to U.S. national interest. Now, given the stakes, you would think that the United States and the EU would be setting off like racehorses to the Triple Crown. Now, the EU does get it, and they are galloping ahead, both in terms of financing and coordination platforms, because it's very complicated to get all of these actors around the same objectives. But it does it because it perceives the middle corridor strategically as part of its global gateway for the energy transition. I would say in comparison to galloping EU, the United States is trotting and on a different track. Well, give a little credit to the United States. They did an excellent presidential C5+1 summit last year during UNGA, and their joint statement does call for much more investment in the middle corridor. But in practicality, not a lot has happened. We've not invested in any core infrastructure in Central Asia. There's been one port investment in Poti in Georgia, but nothing so far yet from the G7's PGI fund and very limited from the Development Finance Corporation, which was called out in that summit. Meanwhile, the EU had a big investment forum in January of this year. They announced commitments of 10.8 billion. That would be about half of what's estimated to be needed. And the big banks have all pitched in. But the bigger thing that concerns me is that the United States and the EU are sponsoring different coordination platforms. If you remember in political science, Manker Olson said the more actors there are, the less they're able to meet their interests. And so you need these coordination platforms, but it mystifies me that the EU has now had two major events this year in Astana and in Ashgabat. And the United States finally got its going in, which is good, and it was a good event in Aktau in September. But I frankly do not understand why we have these two separate platforms. It's been said that the coordinators need to get coordinated. Why does this matter? It matters because we all are eager to help to see Central Asia and Caucasus join into the global energy markets to develop their great, amazing potential, which besides having an ample energy endowment includes critical minerals. It does not take a lot of imagination to see why we would rather see that wealth developed for the Central Asians and Caucasus countries first, and then to go to global markets instead of to be dominated by Russia and China. I think I'll just finish by saying that for the new administration coming in, I think one of the first things they're going to need to do is to replace the strategy for the region that frankly was overtaken by the Afghan withdrawal. And in that regard, I think this middle corridor will be just one piece of a bigger puzzle that will help us help middle class, rising class of middle class Central Asians take a new role in the world. And we'd rather see that done with US support than with an ascendant China with Russia's support.
Okay, Marcia, thank you very much. An excellent overview and table setter for the discussion today. Damian, you are near the middle of the middle corridor in Baku, so let's turn to your perspective on the topic.
Thanks, Andy. It's a pleasure to share the screen with Marcia and Steve, and it's a pleasure to participate in this CFTNI event. Now, the first thing I want to do is to make an obvious but underappreciated point. And Marcia mentioned this increasing engagement by the European Union and the United States towards Central Asia. But there's sort of a piece that's missing here. And I'd like to just, again, it's an obvious but underappreciated point. Azerbaijan is the indispensable country for the advancement of the strategic energy and connectivity ambitions of all the major powers that surround sort of core Eurasia, or what I like to call the Silk Road region, right? Western and non-Western alike. And this includes the United States. Now, this is pretty much what Zbigniew Brzezinski had in mind when he described Azerbaijan as the cork in the bottle containing the riches of the Caspian Sea basin and Central Asia. And I think in the same context, he sort of talked about the independence of the Central Asian states can be rendered nearly meaningless if Azerbaijan becomes fully subordinated to Moscow's control, or for that matter, to that of any other great or major power. So, well, I think that's where I'm starting from. I agree with Brzezinski. That's point number one. Point number two, the middle corridor is the spine or the backbone of core Eurasia or of the Silk Road region. And this is not going to please everybody, but I think we can lump into this discussion the Belt and Road Initiative in a conceptual sense. They're obviously not the same thing, but they're similar in enough ways that we can treat them as being effectually the same, because if nothing else, they focus their strategic attention on this part of the world. Now, that being said, the middle corridor is only one half of this sort of Silk Road connectivity equation, right? The other half is energy. Oil, gas, and renewables. And I can speak to this point later if that's an interest. But I want to emphasize that grasping the veracity of this indispensability or cork in the bottle argument, it doesn't require a degree in rocket science. All you have to do is look at the map. And this is really important, and it's just not really understood very well. Look, if you want to connect Asia with Europe by land or vice versa, well, try as you might, you can't go around Azerbaijan, given present and future, almost certainly future geopolitical circumstances, because to Azerbaijan's north is Russia and to its south is Iran. Now, put this very simple, very basic fact of geography alongside the geoeconomic reality that the northern route via Russia is now impeded, right? For obvious reasons. And put it alongside the other geoeconomic reality that the southern route via Iran is also fraught with way too much risk. Now, both of these geoeconomic realities seem very, very unlikely to change for quite a long time. And this means that nothing resembling a normal, predictable economic and political relationship between the West on the one hand and Russia and Iran on the other is in the cards for the foreseeable future. And this leaves the middle route, which has become the only fully kosher game in town, if I can put it this way, right? And this middle route, again, it's got to pass through Azerbaijan. So let's do a little more mapping to grasp this argument. From the east, you can get to Azerbaijan's Caspian shore in various ways, to its flagship intermodal Baku port. You can do this via road and rail to Kazakhstan's Caspian coast, or via Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan's road and rail networks to its Caspian coast. And all these pieces of infrastructure, by the way, in these Central Asian states are being modernized. They're being prepped for prime time. Now, from the west, you can get to Azerbaijan via the Georgian ports and its road and rail network that's also being expanded as we speak, including the Baku-Tbilisi-Kars Railway. Or you can do this via Anatolia and then into Georgia, again, railway and roads and all that, or through Anatolia into Azerbaijan's exclave of Nakhchivan, and then through an Iran road and rail bypass that's being built, and then from there enter into mainland Azerbaijan. Or instead of going through this little bit of Iran, which is obviously sensitive for some logistics firms, you can go through this sliver of Armenian territory, what Azerbaijan calls the Zangezur corridor, if this gets rebuilt in the context of the peace dividend that may or may not, well, that's right around the corner. How about that, between Armenia and Azerbaijan? But the point is, whatever route you pick, you've got to go through Azerbaijan. So to sum up the first part of what I want to say, when we speak of the Middle Corridor, we're talking about a multimodal economic corridor that begins in Southeast Asia or China and ends in Turkey and the European Union. And it doesn't traverse the territory of any sanctioned state, Iran, Russia. So that's the Middle Corridor's big picture potential seen from here, right? From one of the three keystone states of the Silk Road region, to use a concept put forward by Nicholas Gvozdev, whom some of you know. Now, let me see if I can spend a minute or two on some of the Middle Corridor's challenges, right? And these concern everything that has to do with providing a safe, efficient, secure, reliable, bottleneck-free, and procedurally harmonized land-based transportation and economic corridor between the EU and Asia. Now, when you trace the routes as they are or will become when completed, right, the road and rail links, the fiber optic cables, all that stuff, it turns out, as Marcia said, that the Middle Corridor is shorter by about 2,000 kilometers than the Northern Corridor. But the Middle Corridor has more borders to cross, more choke points, more tariff and customs regimes to deal with, more intermodal transfers to get done. A lot of that happens, you know, just a couple of kilometers away from where I am. More load capacity limitations to navigate and all that. So we're talking about technical and bureaucratic and logistical challenges that still impede the seamless flow of cargo. But even now, even with all that, it only takes about 8 to 10 days for a container train from Shan in China, in Western China, to reach Baku, and then 2 more to get to Georgian ports, right? It's a totally proven route. Now, that being said, I think this is obvious. Significant optimization is still needed. And of course, political will and cash and all the rest of it. But I'm pretty bullish on this. I think this is going to get done. And I think it's going to get done in a few short years. Now, the groundwork is already being laid. And I want to give 2 quick examples. In June of last year, there was an agreement between Kazakhstan, Georgia, and Azerbaijan that amounts to a logistics and regulatory union. It's not called that, but that's basically what it is. Yeah. This and a couple of previous agreements mean that basically the cargo delivery time along the Middle Corridor to the EU is going to be halved, right? Technically, this is what it's going to look like. And this is supposed to happen by the end of the year or on the outside in early 2025. So when you start somewhere in China and you get to somewhere in the European Union, we're talking about a maximum of 18 days, maybe even 12 or 10 days, depending on working out a few additional technical kinks. And most of those have to do with the way the logistics are run in Turkey. Now, in other words, by the time of next year's Major League Baseball All-Star game, this is all, or it should be, up and running at optimal speed. And the northern route just won't be able to match this. And obviously the southern route won't be able to either. Basically, we can forget about the southern route, the one that goes through Iran. Now, my second example involves something that happened last month in September. There was a protocol that established what's called the International Association for Eurasian Transport Route, which is a not particularly optimal English way of putting it. So this is an international agreement signed by the heads of the railway administrations of, this is an interesting list, Austria, Azerbaijan, China, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkey, and Uzbekistan. And the idea is to enhance the coordination of rail transport across the Silk Road region. And that is going to lead directly to the further optimization of cargo transport logistics. And again, that's what's going to bring down the number of days that is needed in order to get goods across one way or the other. Now, let me see if I can do this. I've got 1 more minute, Andy, if that's okay, because it's going to allow me to provide a further reason that I'm bullish on this endeavor, because the growth potential is huge. It's really huge, right? Marcia mentioned this in terms of percentages. I want to do it in terms of TEUs, 20-foot equivalent units. In 2022, the Middle Corridor carried around 70,000 TEUs. The Russia-controlled Northern Corridor carried 1.4 million TEUs. Now, since 2022, those numbers have gone up in the Middle Corridor. It doubled from 2022 to 2023, and in the first 9 months of 2024, cargo volume along the Middle Corridor surged by another 70%. Now, obviously, even those boosted statistics still don't get us within spitting distance of the Northern route's numbers. But I think they will, and much faster than most folks are forecasting. And All right, the last reason I'm bullish, Marcia mentioned this too, World Bank, EBRD, Asia Development Bank, a whole bunch of other international or regional financial institutions all seem to be on board with this endeavor. Even Global Gateway, which I'm slightly more pessimistic on than Marcia seems to be because, well, I don't know, they haven't really put in new cash so far. They've just around some old cash. So let's see if that changes, then, you could. Anyway, the time horizon here for implementation is years. It's not decades.
Yeah.
And none of this is sort of pie in the sky Clintonian, I'd like to do that sort of thing. This is going to happen, and it's going to be potentially game changing for this part of the world. That's all I got. Thank you.
All right, Damian, thank you very much. That was a terrific follow-on to Marcia's opening remarks, getting a sense from really the key link in the middle corridor where you are sitting. Okay, Steve, the ball is in your court.
Okay, thanks. And really, all the remarks so far resonate with me completely. And let me start with just generating a little context. In 2005, when I began collaborating with Andy, Fred Starr, Tom Sanderson, we were exploring the troublesome task of resupplying the U.S. forces in Iraq, which was being accomplished with relative ease, largely by commercial railroad across Russian territory and into Central Asia. This was indeed unique. It was ongoing at the time when Medvedev had stated that Russia was going to recapture its position as the dominant Trans-Eurasian transportation czar, if you will.
Sorry, Steve, just to interrupt for 1 second. You mean Afghanistan, right? Not Iraq.
I meant Afghanistan, yeah. This was just before the Clinton New Silk Road and Xi's Obor. And then that came into view a few years later. To effectively grasp the promise of the corridor, the northern corridor. Let me see if I can share my slides here. Hold on. Yeah, it's going to be a little bit clunky here because I have to keep a couple of things up. Well, here's what we forwarded back then was that there's this broader context of a middle corridor, which is this northern corridor of modern activity. And this is a picture of telecom communications intercepts over a 24-hour period. Now, back then, and this picture was taken in the middle 90s, the corridor basically blocked out the entire northern hemisphere, except you can't even see the oceans, really. The littorals you can't see. Southern hemisphere you can. But in the northern hemisphere, you basically see a very interesting, what I call modern activity gap, which is something that is being filled now. When I tried to get this picture updated in like 2010, they told me that no, you can't see it now. It's for official use only. Well, this is all filled in down here at the modern activity gap. And the northern or the middle corridor is right there where we have just been talking about. And so this represents, I think, what we're trying to fill in with capacity. But frankly, what has happened in filling in this gap is that you have really enhanced the capacity of basically dollars per bytes per second. This is mostly telecom related activity. The dollars per ton per mile, which we've kind of left out of a lot of the conversation, is the key. And dollars per ton per mile is the key for the corridors if they're going to be effective. The shortest amount of time, the most amount of tonnage, greatest amount of off ramps and on ramps, and you get an effective transportation infrastructure. These two, the arc of instability, basically from Brzezinski, that ran right through that modern activity gap. So we basically saw that on the sides of this gap were the expanding expectations of more modern people seeing what they can see around the world and being a little bit less satisfied with what's going on in their particular region. So, we're having these wars. It's a gap between reality and expectations for millions and millions of people. The corridor, the middle corridor, aims to kind of fill that gap with real infrastructure. And that's something good to know. And I liken the whole thing to basically the way the U.S. connected itself from west to east in the middle 1800s. I mean, during the wars, during the tribal conflicts, during the Civil War, during all these troubles, and with very little engineering capacity, they crafted the connection between the San Francisco and basically to the Mississippi River, primarily to Omaha. I liken Omaha to Georgia and Azerbaijan. I liken the Canadians' follow-on move to do things in the north to Russia. And I liken our southern piece, came along later because of the Civil War, but that included the Panama Canal to China's maritime road. It's very much similar to what we're trying to tackle across the northern corridor of modern activity, central being the middle corridor. And I think, it's happening. This is, like Damian said, it is happening. So it'll take patience. We're not very patient, but this whole thing in the U.S. took, it took 30 years to make happen. But I think I heard earlier that this is going to happen fairly quickly, and I think it can happen. I think the Georgia-Azerbaijan piece and that area there is key. And there ought to be some central organizing and convening authorities in place there to make things smooth and to smooth things along as we go. Perhaps even when we did it in the U.S., they had actually put an office in the Capitol. The railroad men are extremely independent, and but they competed against each other in the U.S. They even actually went past each other, and they had to be told by Lincoln to, hey, slow down and connect. They wanted to complete their own railroads across. There was an office in the U.S. Capitol where the senators and congressmen could go down, get a drink, and look at all the charts and all the engineering diagrams and all the things that the companies wanted to show them. Need to kind of replicate this in a central location, maybe over there in Georgia. But lastly, I just want to say that politics and investment are the challenge now. The engineering is child's play. The overarching interconnected internet piece is child's play. It's already basically in place. And number one, the middle corridor is the key. The development process is underway, as has been mentioned. And, at the risk of using an often used phrase, the train has left the station. And we need to follow it, push it to the way our interests are aligned. But it's going to happen. It's going to happen. That's it.
Okay, Steve, thank you very much. I think I want to go immediately to a couple of questions that have come in from Richard Kozlorich. I was struck by the data point. I want to make sure I got this right, Marcia, that Russia-China trade has overtaken China-Europe trade. That is pretty astounding. And Richard's question says, China seems to be the main prime beneficiary of the middle corridor, but is there enough trade to justify the cost of infrastructure and generate income to cover the O&M costs? And then his next question how does Azerbaijan's continued closure of land borders with its neighbors affect these corridors? So let me turn to that. That's a question I think directly for Damian. But what about the China question? Because I think that, as was alluded to 10, 15 years ago, as 2013, when the OBOR was announced, later termed the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, it looked as though China would be the principal sponsor for and beneficiary for a lot of this this new corridor, but that seems to have come into question.
May I just say one word about China? They really only came out fully behind it in October of 2023 at a summit in Kazakhstan. But since then, the reports I'm reading are that they are not as bullish on it as they had been earlier, and that the Europeans are really the ones that are driving this now, because they are really investing heavily in Central Asia in green energy options. And I think that it is enough to run this from Central Asia through the Caucasus and Turkey into the Black Sea zone and the ports in Romania, for example, and we hope eventually to Ukraine. So I would have agreed with the question a year ago, because in fact, China would be a beneficiary, but they still have their own issues. And you can see the trade is changing dramatically. Electronic vehicles, for example, are now going to be produced in China, not, imported from Germany. So I think there's a lot of change in we have to remember, you can't run a transport corridor with something to go through it, and that trade is what's going to be determining the future directions as much as anything, as much as geopolitics.
Right. Absolutely. The commercial factor is essential, and that is something that often gets underplayed in Washington discussions about geopolitics, geoeconomics, even geoeconomics, et cetera. Damian, what's your response to the Azerbaijan border question?
Can I just say something about the China thing for just a moment?
Yeah, sure.
First of all, the Chinese have already put in God knows how many billion into various pieces of infrastructure in Central Asia. So they've put their money in. It's there. And stuff has been built. Just a couple of months ago, a China-led consortium won the bid in Georgia to build the country's first deep sea port in Anaklia. The competing bid was, I think it was a Dutch company, I can't remember, but it was certainly an EU conglomerate with some American money, and they lost out. Now, there are a whole bunch of reasons why that happened, but the overall point is that the Chinese, this is really the first serious investment by China on this side of the Caspian, right? So yes, I agree with Marcia that they're certainly not as bullish as they were 5-10 years ago, but they're not at all, pulling back.
No.
Now, how that ends up playing out, we'll see. The Chinese tend to do things with commercial interest in mind, but also with some others. So, and in that sense, they're not exactly that different from some other players. With regards to the Azerbaijan question, the answer is not at all, because yes, the land borders are closed, and I'll explain why in a second. But that doesn't have any serious impact on cross-border commercial trade movement. So the land borders are effectively closed for individuals and for sort of retail traders, if I can put it that way, who cross, again, as individuals or with a van full of whatever. So the official reason for a while was that this was a COVID measure. But more recently, President Aliyev has come out and basically said, and I'm paraphrasing very loosely, the fact that Azerbaijan kept its land borders closed is the reason why a whole bunch of security-related issues were able to be dealt with in the way that they were, which is, I think, a euphemism for saying we prevented a whole bunch of incursions from, the Northern Caucasus and Iran and, perhaps elsewhere, presumably Armenia, but that land border has been closed forever, or since independence. in the 90s. And whether or not that's going to remain the case, who knows? Right now, the only way that sort of individuals can get in and out of Azerbaijan are with some exceptions, are by plane. But that again has not affected any of the serious commercial and trade stuff at all. So it's simply not a factor.
Okay,
It obviously affected some of the border towns, right, on sort of, again, the retail commercial level, but in a big picture sense, no.
Thanks. I want to pose a question before I turn back to the questions from the audience. There's some good ones out there we'll definitely return to. But in my experience, along with Steve and our Northern Distribution Network, starting with the Northern Distribution Network project, and then the Modern Silk Road project, 2009, 2010, that we saw as providing actually a significant part of an exit strategy, if you will, for the United States in the Afghan war, and that is to focus more about the economic sustainability of Afghanistan, and to put more money into a trade and transit strategy that would support buy-in from regional partners on nearby Afghanistan. And then even with the a project that I led subsequently on Eurasia Reconnecting, which was more focused on Central Asia and Azerbaijan, but the similar framework that Steve put forward today, and that you both all three of you have talked about. Even when we had a war going on in Afghanistan, and well, this is kind of a double-edged sword, I suppose. The war in Afghanistan put so much focus for 20 years on U.S. policy towards Central Asia and this more broadly in the Caspian region on securitization, and much less so on economic development and prosperity, if you will. But what we found also was that it was extremely hard this was the most intense experience I had and frustration I had with experiencing the failure of U.S. government in toto to be able to think strategically and implement a strategic plan with prioritization and understanding of trade-offs and making hard decisions of trade-off, et cetera. I remember with Fred Starr, we had a meeting with the late Andy Marshall, the director of the Office of Net Assessment in 2009. We were pitching our Modern Silk Road strategy, which we modestly called the key to success in Afghanistan. He said, Andy, I like this a lot, but there is no demand in Washington for strategic thinking. And actually, when I saw what was in 2009 the economic strategy supposedly the United States had for Afghanistan, it was simply a list of 26 things that the State Department had developed that were all nice things, but you put that into a Harvard Business School case study, I mean, it would fail miserably. So I guess there are two things. One, the difficulty of the United States are developing a strategy, let alone implementing it. And if we were not able to do this when we had much higher stakes, I think, directly in the region, which may have undercut it to some extent. How are we? What is the real value added that the United States can provide for this project now, and how best to frame it? And I would caveat that with the point that actually, the majority of trade that's taking place in the middle corridor is not, all the way from east to west or west to east. Less than 50% of those goods go all the way. The majority of it, 60 or 60+%, is using partial parts of the middle corridor and getting things into and out of the Caspian region, but not necessarily going all the way through it. Should that lead us to frame it a little bit differently? Because, you know, okay, Marcia talked about the difficulty of you know, okay, 140 million tons in 2020 went by the northern corridor. We're talking to 2 or 3 million tons right now for the middle corridor. But you know, the elephant in the room is really sea trade, which 10x's the northern corridor. So that's a lot. It's a lot of a question, I suppose, and comment. But I'll just put that on the table for all three of you.
Let me jump in if I could, please. Just on sea trade first. Remember, those countries in Central Asia have to get to the sea. So this isn't, I don't think we're able to compare those two as priorities. But to go back to your really key point, which I really liked, can the United States be strategic? That means choosing and having a choosing among priorities, not a list, and then also envisioning a theory of change and success that is logical, that can come from those steps. And if you just take the middle corridor as one example of a priority, and then you put in a vision of success, and what could that future look like? It means an arc of regional activity up to Ukraine, which would very much benefit both ends of that arc. And then you think within the region of the momentum that's already going on behind C5+1 plus Azerbaijan. They aren't ready for a regional organization, that's clear. But informally, I think they are moving that direction. So this middle corridor has to be part of that longer vision, and it is a choice. We're investing in the middle corridor, which we, of course, connect to critical minerals. The United States isn't as dynamic as a trade partner, of course. We've got the distance, but how can we make a difference? What is our value added? We have to be in the room. So when the coordination platforms are going on in Ashgabat and in Astana, and it's led by the EU, we've got to be in the room. This has to be a Western objective, and we have to see it in this broader arc of a vision of where we're going to be in another 10 years, 20 years. And I'm saying that from an external perspective. I have a very different view when I'm looking at just Central Asia or the Caucasus. There, I think we have to have a very different strategic focus on the felt needs and aspirations of the people, who are the ones who, as I think Steve put very well, they want to be part of a modernizing society, and we want to be there and be right with them.
Okay, thank you. I want to add, Marcia, then to your point about coordinating the coordinators. It is like herding cats, but it's absolutely essential to make the progress more efficient. Damian, let me turn to you and then to Steve.
Well, look, I think that not getting engaged, United States, European Union, is tantamount to geopolitical malpractice, to be perfectly honest. But the question is, what choices are being made, and what's the logic, right? So this part of the world is not a vital American interest. However you define it, whichever way you look, it's just not. I mean, I suppose if you're not making choices and you're not rank ordering, then everything is a vital interest. But if you take it seriously, it's not. That being said, it's not unimportant. So what can the United States do realistically to move this along? Well, it can try very hard to encourage the countries, sort of the core states of the Silk Road region on either side of the Caspian, to come together in various formal and informal arrangements within the context of the Middle Corridor and lots of other things, to how to put this, to move away from being objects of major power rivalry, and to transform themselves by, again, coming together into and becoming sort of subjects of international order. And that's really, it's a project of emancipation that begins with trying to understand those countries as they understand themselves, not trying to transform their internal governance or any, ambitions of that sort, and trying to find and to claim one of many of the seats around sort of the table of the foreign or external powers that will have a place and a voice, but that won't be setting the agenda in any serious or at least in any game-changing way. But I think that's enough, because the point is just to prevent any of the other major powers that happen to be geographically closer or adjacent to the Silk Road region to take a dominant role, right? You don't have that already. You have geopolitical heterogeneity in this part of the world, right? You have ambitions from a couple of the neighbors, but even those ambitions are not acted upon in a way that in practice that certainly would, some would like, and it certainly some of the people in charge of those countries. But I think that on this issue, and on pretty much any other issue that has to do with the conduct of international relations, the first thing you got to do is to figure out what's not possible, right? So if you aim much higher than the market can bear, you're going to end up either Afghanistan, or you're going to end up not being effective, right? You mentioned the Terry Marshall and all that, and Andy Marshall, sorry, and I remember in 2011 Petraeus, probably building on some of the stuff that some of you had something to do with, conceived, and then Hillary Clinton gave a speech, I remember, on I looked it up as you were talking, the new Silk Road strategy. It was like one speech and then
she called it initiative.
Fine, even better. And
well,
that obviously went nowhere, but it went nowhere because the idea was, how do we integrate Afghanistan into Central Asia, right? And that was understandable, but it was predicated on a whole bunch of things that the United States would have to do forever that it clearly wasn't in the mood to do, as it turned out. So I think that it's really important to understand what, the correct choice to get the ambition right, and to really take these countries seriously, not to see them as pieces on a chessboard, right? Brzezinski did a lot of good work on this part of the world, but thinking of this part of the world as a grand chessboard is just, it's wrong, it's dangerous, it's obviously insulting in a way, because obviously the logic is, the only two sovereign players here are two external powers, or more than two, but certainly none of the actual pieces on the. So I think that if this is done properly, it's eminently achievable.
Thanks, Damian. I think it's a very important point about right-sizing the ambition and the mission. Steve.
Yeah, just real quick. There's two things here. One is follow on with Damian's talk about what's happening in Georgia and how China won the port there. How can that happen? I mean, to me, the Black Sea is the perfect place to start now that the Ukraine is in this mire, could be there for years doing this, is to use the Black Sea, the Romania, through to Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Transmodal is child's play. I mean, we can do anything we want with transmodal. You need a port in Georgia. And let me just follow up by saying, if we don't deal with this now, and we allow Eurasia to become integrated like the US, let's say in the next 20, 30 years, in terms of its transportation links, economies, connected trade, and so forth, the US will be on the dark side of the planet economically.
Okay, that's not a place where we want to be. Let me turn now to a couple of last questions, comments, and then leave it to you for some concluding remarks. Is there any, from Asselbeck, Asselkanov, is there any impact of the increasing significance of the middle corridor on the regional integration of Central Asian countries? The short answer is yes, but leave it to you for the longer answers. And then from Nick Gvazdyov, also an alumnus of the Center for the National Interest and the magazine, The National Interest, would be interested in the perspective of the panelists on the concerns of the countries of the Silk Road region from being drawn into geopolitical rivalries. It would seem that their pitch for the corridor is that it would be geopolitically neutral and open to connect everyone who wants to use it and pay for it. Okay. And a final comment from Rich. You must account for the changing political winds in Georgia and Azerbaijan away from the West. Gives Russia leverage into the corridor. Okay. Final comments. Why don't we go in reverse order of the introductory comments and start with you, Steve.
Oh, thanks, Andy, for having me on this. I really do appreciate re-engaging on this after it's been a while. I think that we're on the right topic. I believe that this is something that's going to happen. It may be slower than some people think, but frankly, it's just political will and investment, because everything else is easy. Everything else can be done. And so it's got to have some kind of U.S. backing, real convening authority and backing. And it's got to have an independent set of Central Asian states that will can act as a regional entity. And I think the State Department needs to come around and make that happen. Thank you.
Okay, Steve.
Yeah.
Damian.
One sentence on this. I don't think that any country in this part of the world is pro-Western, pro-Russian, pro-Chinese, pro-Turkey. They're pro themselves.
Right.
And I think that's really, this is the thing that more than anything else, that all outsiders, all foreigners who have some stake in this part of the world need to understand. Think of it as strategic transactionalism, right? If we had more time, I'd develop that, but that's strategic transactionalism.
Okay. I think this was the goal and the Eurasia Reconnecting Project. The first part of it was we did 8 country study reports of the 3 South Caucasus states and the 5 Central Asian states, based on a lot of interview work and field visits, to understand and to articulate to Washington how these countries view their interests in this larger, fluid strategic context. Marcia.
Thank you. To touch on the questions and also sum up. If you look at Europe, the acquis communautaire is 40% about transport. That doesn't close other countries out of the picture, but it enables the interior to trade with each other. And I think we have to look at the Middle Corridor and other networks in the same vein. So yes, potentially it could help lead to kind of a more institutionalized union, customized economic union in the region, but it wouldn't have to exclude or be, it would be geopolitically neutral. And to top the wonderful comment by Steve and Damian, they both are very impressive. It's been a pleasure to be with you both. I think we all share the same goal, and that is to have the Eurasia become the supercontinent it can be, and have the United States part of it.
Okay, excellent, concise conclusion. I think we will have unanimous support for that conclusion. Let me just thank our audience for joining in on this discussion. I'm sure we're going to be returning to it on repeated occasions in the context of our project, Central Asia Connectivity Project, and to thank our terrific panelists, Marcia, Damian, and Steve, for their very thoughtful and articulate and incisive comments about the Middle Corridor, which has nothing to do with a Tolkien novel. All right, thank you, everybody, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. I think the next topic we're going to be looking at is the future of nuclear power in Central Asia, which is becoming quite something in the last couple of years. All right, thanks everybody, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Andy.